So first, before we understand why biofuels should be implemented as a wedge, let's talk about what biofuels are. Biofuels are fuels created using natural processes that are slow but are significantly faster than the formation of fossil fuels that take millions of years. It is created from biomass such as plants and organic wastes, and it is the closest renewable replacement that we have for fossil fuels currently. Though it can't produce the same byproducts such as plastic, it can be used as fuel in many ways just like fossil fuels for things such as transportation and cooking. Currently, biofuels are used as additives in fuel for cars and some other ways such as ethanol, biodiesel, and straight vegetable oil. The way biofuel works allows it to produce negligible or even carbon negative emissions. It uses biomass from plants and other organic material, including waste, to synthesize and create biofuel. Plants and biomass take in a certain amount of carbon from the atmosphere to sustain themselves, and this same carbon inside the plants transferred into biomass is what later emitted into the atmosphere when burning the biofuel. This is what keeps net carbon emissions at a minimum. So in the end, by burning biofuels, we're only emitting carbon that is borrowed from the environment. This value can be carbon negative, especially when considering the use of waste as biomass and other methods of production such as for algae biofuels. So, why exactly do we need to move away from fossil fuels? So, fossil fuels, namely crude oil and its derivatives, are highly detrimental to our environment and our economy for three main reasons. So, one is that it's a major cause of pollution and climate change. Crude oil and its derivatives are used in just about everything from cooking to flying planes, and all of those processes cause much pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. Another reason we must move away from fossil fuels is that it is non-renewable, and so at some point in the future, this resource will definitely be completely depleted. This ultimatum may not occur today or tomorrow, but is definitely inevitable, and we should be prepared for that. The last main reason is that it is a resource our world is way too dependent on, and despite all the problems it causes environmentally, it can be detrimental to our economy as well. As we have seen recently with the situation in Ukraine, the shortage of oil caused by lower Russian exports have caused prices to spike, hurting the commoner who probably just needs to get to work. If more severe shortages were to arise, our world would literally come to a stop. Hence, we should turn to more resources of energy other than fossil fuels, such as renewables, in order to reduce our dependence on crude oil. So, why exactly do we need to be using biofuels instead? There are four main reasons we believe that biofuels should be implemented as a wedge to end climate change. So, one of those reasons is that biofuels are renewable, unlike fossil fuels that take millions of years to form. This is because all it takes to create biofuels is arable land, the resources to create biomass, and time. There are other ways to create biofuels such as algae, as well as using waste as well. The form of production is also an important reason to be using biofuels. Biofuels are completely natural, and so part of production would be planting trees, plants, and other organisms for harvesting the required biomass later. This is sure to add to the health of our atmosphere by acting as a carbon basin and releasing more oxygen instead. This carbon will later be emitted during the usage of fuels, but all in all, emissions would decrease significantly and possibly even be carbon negative. Biomass can also be created out of organic waste, especially ones created from agriculture and commercial waste. As our world grows in population even more, we're going to be needing a way to dispose of and make use of much organic waste. Biofuels, when using waste, is carbon negative and produces more energy. This would mean less waste in landfills while still making use of it in a positive way. Biofuels also produce significantly cleaner emissions than fossil fuels, which is not only good for the environment but also for us. This would especially be helpful in areas such as Delhi that suffer from serious air pollution. So another reason for using biofuels is its utility, that is, the closest we have currently to rival fossil fuels. We may not be able to produce byproducts such as tar and plastic, but you can surely use it as fuel in a car or even for generating electricity. And it'll be easier to implement as we wouldn't need to change your whole lifestyle like you may have to do with something like electric cars. Biofuels also provide us with economic benefits. As mentioned earlier, our world is currently highly dependent on crude oil and fossil fuels. So, with the transition toward biofuels and other renewables, there will be less pressure on the extraction of fossil fuels. This would alleviate some of the dependence on crude oil and allow us to eventually fully transition into implementing a full wedge of biofuel. To add on to that, the industry would also create jobs in the economy along with its expansion. With anything good, there also comes its own challenges, and biofuels are no exception with its own political, economic, and social challenges to implementation. For one, there are many countries around the world, especially in the GCC, that rely on oil as their main export, which means their entire economy is dependent on crude oil exports. Some countries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE are slowly trying to move away from fossil fuels, but most countries power on as they expand operations and production. The sudden start of implementing biofuels would mean the displacement of business and cash flow for them, and so they wouldn't exactly take to it kindly, as their customers transition away from their product, which would cause conflict. Though it may not be physical, it can be through politics and economics. This transition is very slow, and they may use many economic tactics to squash biofuels, such as rapidly decreasing prices to quash any new businesses, a tactic called dumping, among other tactics to reduce competition in the fuel space. Another challenge biofuels will have is the fact that the whole world is completely dependent on fossil fuels, and every single person, company, industry, and country has used and still uses fossil fuels in some way or the other. Overcoming that challenge of gaining market share in an energy economy completely dominated by fossil fuels with a market share of 80% is hefty, especially considering the world consumes about 1.5 trillion gallons of oil per year, while we only even produce a few billion gallons in biofuel. Biofuels do have a part in the fossil fuel industry as an additive to the oil, but that only makes up a small portion of global energy production, so there's a long way to go. To add on to that, even among renewables, biofuels are still not close to as recognized as solar, wind, nuclear, and geothermal energy. Other renewables still have more support from the government, public trust, subsidies, money, and backing from the public when compared to biofuels. So, all in all, biofuels must gain recognition to gain support from the public and governments, similar to how there are incentives and support for electric vehicles, solar power, and the like, to be able to grow enough to become a wedge to fight climate change. A long journey indeed.
The regulations regarding the biofuel is determined by the Department of Energy, which is also supported by the government officials and the National Biofuel Board. However, they're not responsible for producing biofuel. Instead, biofuel companies such as Cozen and Verbio are responsible for the production of biofuel. In Canada, the federal government is responsible for the implementation of biofuel. The National Renewable Diesel Demonstration Initiative, otherwise known as the NRDDI, was responsible for knowing in advance how biodiesel would perform in the Canada market. Other programs launched by the Canadian government include Eco Energy for Biofuel, which took $1.5 billion over 9 years to boost Canada's production of biofuel. As such, the ultimate decision for implementing biofuel is heavily determined by the federal government. As covered in our previous section, in order to fully optimize biofuel, then the engine must be modified. The modern cars use internal combustion engines, and in order to change the engine, the performance of the combustion control with unconventional fuel is necessary. Technology, specifically computational fluid dynamics, can contribute heavily to the development of a new engine. In the end, two solutions are formulated: reducing the chemical kinetics of the turbulence, meaning the shaking of the engine should be eliminated, or use another type of biofuel called algae-based biofuel. Algae are single-celled organisms which grow on salt and marine water. On top of this, algae-based biofuel do not require changing of engine, and algae can be grown on arable land and in salt water, which displaces farmland used for growing food. The Department of Energy reported that algae have the potential to yield at least 30 times more energy potential than land. The ease of growing algae allows the country to quickly switch their economic model. On top of this, the increased energy potential on the algae-based biofuel makes algae a valid competitor for electricity. The cost of biofuel highly depends on labor, land, feedstock, and the oil market. Biofuel production takes farm resources which otherwise can be used for growing food. Cellulosic feedstock refers to any non-food matters which are renewable and is available on a recurrent basis. These feedstocks contain cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin, all of which can be found in the cell wall of plants. Bioethanol, the most common type of biofuel production, uses hemicellulose and cellulose from the cellulosic feedstocks. The process includes pre-treating the biomass to create cellulose and hemicellulose. Then water is added to decompose the sugar inside of it. Finally, the separation process gets rid of any residue and solid matters, leaving it with pure ethanol. However, this production takes both labor and land to grow feedstocks. Using current practices, a wedgeful of biofuel would use approximately an area of land equal to 1/6 of India. On top of this, Canada is a very car-heavy country. Canada consumes 328 cubic feet per capita of gas per day, which is the equivalent of 9,787 liters per capita of gas per day. Biofuels such as ethanol are normally $1 more expensive than regular gas, meaning almost $10,000 is needed to create the biofuel, which is equivalent to the average daily consumption of gas in Canada. Despite the challenges, biofuel is definitely a wedge which could reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases over various industrial sectors and in our daily lives.